Hello everyone, it's Silvia from Feel Tarot. Welcome to my channel. If you're an absolute beginner in tarot and you want to have an idea on how to start, then this is your video. So I've been asked for over a year now, ever since I started this channel, to do this video, and I always refused, and I have to explain why. I don't actually believe that it only takes an hour or so to learn how to read tarot. Tarot is a fantastic divination tool, but it's not just for divination. There is so many things that can be ascribed to tarot as your gateway to your personal growth, for example. It's something that will help you throughout your life. It doesn't just help you to try and make sense of what is happening in your life under certain specific circumstances, but it will also give you the strength and the self-confidence to go ahead in times of trouble. And I personally started learning how to read tarot when I was quite young, I have to say. It was over 36 years ago, and I have been reading tarot for others and for myself throughout all of these years. I've also been collecting decks, and I have to say that we have been spoiled recently, the last at least 5 years, with a plethora of really magnificent, really beautiful tarot decks, and oracle decks as well, of course. I think that there is a moment in which a tarot reader or a tarot collector as well take stock of what we have. We understand that this practice is very similar to something that is akin to magic. It's manifesting magic. Reading tarot is a way of understanding the message that comes from the card and understanding how to relay that message back to someone you're reading for, whether this person is yourself or someone else. As such, we always need to understand how sacred this practice is. We have a responsibility as tarot readers, and as such, I also believe that we owe everyone we are reading for, whether again it's ourselves or others, to know as much as we can about this wonderful tool. It took me a few years to feel confident enough to start reading for others, and I don't think that is something that can be really explained. I know that there's a number of manuals on how to read tarot. There's also a number of videos that explain to you how to read tarot in less than an hour. I believe that those videos are wonderful tools for you as an absolute beginner to have a little bit of an idea of what tarot is. But I don't think that that's actually enough to give you that confidence you need in order to understand, as I said, the message relayed by the card, and then say it back and interpret that message and translate that back for the person you're reading for to understand it. However, there is something that can be said about tarot. You need to start somewhere. If you want to understand how to read tarot, you have to start. And so I believe that when we look at this really beautiful deck, which is the RWS, so this is the US Games edition of the Raider Tarot deck. As you can see, this is the original drawings by Pamela Coleman Smith. It says here, under the direction of Arthur Edward Waite. I have to say that throughout the years, reading all the correspondence between Pamela Coleman Smith and others interested in the occult and in the use of images in tarot, I don't know whether we can actually say that Arthur Edward Waite was actually directing Pamela Coleman Smith. I think that she has a much bigger agency that it was at first believed in the choice of the cards and the images on the cards. Regardless of that, we now know how important her work has been. And I think that when we need to choose a deck to start, really literally as an absolute beginner, I still refer back to all my students to this deck, the RWS, what's normally called the RWS, so the Raider Waite Smith. And the reason why I always point to this deck is because not only is the original work of Pixie, Pamela Coleman Smith, but it's also because it does contain in all of the images the symbols that make learning tarot slightly easier, or at least they make it easier to visualize the meanings of the cards thanks to the recognition of the symbols that the cards present. So what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to go through all of the 78 cards. So there's 22 major arcanas and 56 minor arcanas, including 16 court cards. I'm going to go through all of these cards. We're going to have a look at them, but I am going to just tell you perhaps one of two keywords that you can memorize in such a way that then it will become easier for you to have a starting point, let's say. Please understand, if you are a seasoned tarot reader, this video is not for you. This is literally for an absolute beginner, because once you start learning tarot and maybe a couple of years have gone and you start learning for others, you start to understand also the best way to convey this message. You will also take a step back from the initial keywords that you learn when you learned to associate the meanings with, of the cards with the tarot cards themselves. And the reason why any reader would do that is because we gather more knowledge. We gather also knowledge about different disciplines that are related or referenced in the tarot cards, like, for example, astrology or alchemy, but also numerology, or, for example, the method of reading in a sequence. I have to say that those are my favorite, especially numerology and the sequential method. And I will not explain that in this video simply because I don't want to overwhelm you. If you're an absolute beginner, I don't want to overburden you. And I simply believe that since, as we said at the beginning, you have to start somewhere, this is probably the easiest way to start. So let's have a look. Okay. So let me just zoom in so we can actually have a look at a proper look at the cards. And as I said, I'm just going to say a couple of words about each and every card. So we start with the Fool. Generally speaking, in many Italian ancient tarot decks, the Fool did not have a number. What we can see here in Pamela Coleman's depiction of the Fool, we do have a number. It's number 0. I actually prefer it this way because 0 is a very symbolic kind of number, because it also represents a circle, and it represents the circle of life, which is indeed something very important and symbolical for the Fool card. We talk about new beginnings. We also talk about the difference between a wise fool and a new fool. A new fool is someone that starts their cycle of life for the very first time. They have absolutely no idea what they're doing, but they have this courage of taking the leap. A wise fool, on the other hand, is a person that has already been through the cycle of life, perhaps many times before, and retains a certain wisdom. When we're looking at the Magician, the keyword here is resources. We're looking at the resources, and as you can see here, there are all of the symbols of the 4 minor suits. So we've got the wands, we got the sword, we got the card, and we also have the pentacle or coin. We also have a person that is really knowledgeable of everything that they own as a resources, everything that you need in order to be able to progress into this Fool's journey, which is also a different name for the major arcanas, is within yourself. You can see that there is also pointing to the infinity of time with the lemniscate on top of the Magician, and the Magician is also pointing to the as above because of the arm raised like that, and the so below. As above and so below are two terms to mean that everything that happens in the so below, so the earthly matters, is reflected in the as above, so cosmic and ethereal matters. When we're looking at the High Priestess, we're thinking about using the power of your own intuition. It's always extremely important to understand that there's symbols here referring to the moon as well. We see the 3 phases of the moon, which is kind of a hat for the High Priestess, and there is also a moon at the person of the High Priestess' feet. There's also a pomegranate here. There's that sense of custodian. The High Priestess is a custodian of everything that has happened. So she's a custodian of time. She's a custodian of every single fact and custodian of all memories. Because of that, her intuition is the most powerful one. When you're looking at the Empress, you need to think about the power of creation. There's a lot of decks in which the Empress is actually depicted as pregnant, and that is a very powerful symbol to point to the power of creation. When we're looking at the Emperor, we understand the power of order. The Emperor has the role to bring back order into the chaos, and as such, he has the power to formulate and enforce the laws. When we're looking at the Hierophant, we need to think about the cycle of learning and teaching, and it's an infinite cycle. Think about a teacher. When a teacher is teaching someone, they constantly need to update their knowledge. If they don't do so, they will become obsolete, and what they teach will also become obsolete. Hence the cycle of continuous learning and teaching. When we're looking at the Lovers card, in this case, it's always pointing to a choice. We are asked in our journey throughout the major arcanas, the Fool's journey, we're asked to choose the right path. When we're looking at the Chariot, we're looking at overcoming obstacles. There is a very strong movement in this card, a very strong power. When we're looking at the Strength card, we're thinking about gathering confidence. The Strength card points at canceling and eradicating all of the doubts we have upon ourselves, and understanding that by doing so, we gather the necessary confidence to go ahead in our journey. The Hermit card with the lantern and the fact that they have this staff in order to support themselves points to a person that needs to understand themselves. There is a little bit of a setback when it comes to the Fool's journey throughout the major arcanas. After having overcome all of the obstacles and gained the self-confidence that they need in order to go ahead, there is a sense of trying and look inwards and understanding oneself. The Wheel of Fortune is the card in the major arcana that stands for the cycle of life, a cycle which is always made of ups and downs. Whatever is down will come back up eventually. Whatever is up will go back down eventually. The Justice card is one of the cards that I always see my students struggling with, because most of the time there is this sense of not being able to separate the meaning of the Justice and Judgment card. One very easy way and correct way to think of the Justice card as opposed to the Judgment card is the Justice card represents consequences in the soul below. So legal matters, when we do something that is illegal, when we do something that has, let's say, consequences to other people that are around us, or not necessarily illegal, but we will have to face those consequences. The Hanged One is always referring to taking on a different perspective in life. Sometimes this card also refers to a self-sacrifice. The Death card, I find, is always a difficult one for absolute beginners. This card in and by itself is not a negative card. There is almost never the possibility to read this card as an actual physical death. It really does depend on the cards around it and the reading in specifics. But generally speaking, you have to think about the Death card as a cycle again. The Death card points to an ending, but that ending is necessary to just give the spark to a new beginning. The Temperance card is a very beautiful card to come after the Death card because it points to the passing of time. And with time, there is this sense of communication, of flow between the two cups where the water is passed continuously. This also points to a sense of balance. The Devil card instead points to the breaking of that balance and brings up the words of temptations and doubts. The Tower card refers to letting go of what no longer serves you. As you can see in many decks, you will see that it's only the upper part of the tower that is actually stricken by lightning and it's falling down because it's been demolished. But if the foundation is solid, it will not fall down. The Star card is always the necessarily healing that comes after the Tower card, and it's also a renewed sense of hope. Sometimes it may also manifest a bond with our ancestors. The Moon card points to a turning inwards, but it's also pointing to the overpowering strength of nature that is all around us. The Sun card points to joy, even though it's generally speaking a joy that is limited in time, but it also points to clarity because it is the powerful light of the sun that is illuminating things and not anymore the veiled light of the moon. And as I was saying before, the Judgment card is one of the two cards that may cause a bit of confusion. So whilst we were looking at the Justice card, the Major Arcana number 11, as consequences in the So Below, the Judgment card, which is the Major Arcana number 20, points to consequences in the As Above. At the same time, though, it also can mean some news coming your way or a calling coming your way. And the World card, which is the last of the major arcanas, points to a completion, a success. But let's never forget that there's always this sense of cycle and circle. And in this, we need to read the necessary wheel to start that cycle again. So the Fool has finally completed their journey throughout the major arcanas, but when they get to the World card, even though there is the knowledge of having completed a journey, there is also that sense of having to start a new one. And therefore, they will become a new wise fool as opposed to the new fool that was at the beginning. We're now moving on to the minors. The Suit of Wands is referring to the alchemical element of fire. And we're also referring to let's say, a basic knowledge of numerology. That is, I believe, the best way to understand how to read the minors. So the aces in all of the minors always point to a beginning. In the way in which you can differentiate between the various aces is to learn what the minor suit actually represents in the alchemical order. And the Suit of Wands, as I said, is representing the suit of fire. So when we look at new beginnings, in this case, we can point at new beginnings with a lot of energy, dynamism, the dynamism and creative energy of fire. The Two of Wands points to a necessary reckoning, understanding what our world is made of. If you can see, the symbol in this card is a man holding a globe, like a world, in their hand. And what they're doing is assessing whether that is big enough for them. Is my world big enough for myself? Or is it so small that I can actually hold it within the palm of my hand? And as a consequence, in the Three of Wands, we understand that that world is too small for us at this point. We need to explore, we need to break the boundaries, and we need to go into a new uncharted territory. So the Three of Wands is setting your wheels in motion. The Four of Wands refers to the celebration and the settling down. After having completed our explorations, we understand what we can call home, and we celebrate that. It can also point to the celebration of a marriage. The Five of Wands is pointing to competition. It's the competition, though, that is almost playful. It is a kind of a disruption. All of the fives point to a certain level of disruption. There's a lot of fire. Let's not forget that the Suit of Wands point to the Suit of Fire. So this is the kind of competition and aggression that can spark between friends that at a certain point they just have an argument and they can't seem to agree on something. The Six of Wands instead points to a victory. However, this victory is always celebrated, but there is also a warning to this victory. It's a victory that has been achieved thanks to the help of a teamwork. It's not a victory that has been achieved just by one person, even though we do have the sense of leader. The Seven of Wands points to standing up for yourself. And in this case, there is that sense of perhaps not having understood how important it was, the teamwork that led you to victory. And now you kind of find yourself having to stand up for yourself and defending yourself against the opinion of everyone else. The Eight of Wands always expresses speed and also travel, sometimes even news coming your way. But one important thing to say is that because it is again in the Suit of Fire, it also sometimes points to a lack of direction. There is this sense of speed and travel, but we don't necessarily know where we're going. We didn't even have time to choose the direction in which we're going. The Nine of Wands, with a person that is definitely injured and tired, we look at the word resilience. So this card represents that we have done so much already, and you can show that. We can see that from the person and their state of their body. But the problem is that we are not there yet. We have not completed our task. Something still needs to be done. The Ten of Wands points to overburdened. We have taken way too much onto ourselves, perhaps even somebody else's burden, when we didn't necessarily need to. And this points to exhaustion. When it comes to the core cards, you will see that there is the combination of a maturity throughout the core cards. So the core cards always start with a page, then a knight, then a queen, and finally a king. And there is this sense of evolution and maturation of an archetype throughout the suit that we're looking at right now. So we're looking at the suit of wands. We talked about the alchemical symbol related to the suit of wands, which is the alchemical symbol of fire. And therefore, we're looking at this sort of evolution throughout the archetypes that start from the beginning and end to some kind of a completion with the kings. So the Page of Wands in this case represents the creative imagination and the creative power. There is the spark of life, there is a spark of fire, there is this sense of having everything at our hands in order for us to be able to accomplish anything we want to. But we don't have the necessarily knowledge to do so because, as we said, there is an evolution in the core cards and the pages, that's the initial stage. When it comes to the Knight of Wands, we're looking at the archetype of the adventurer. This person is always looking at movement. All of the knights in general refer to movement. And as I said before, we need to understand the meaning of movement in the alchemical element of fire. So there is a really strong sense of going out of our way, hence the archetype of the adventurer. When we're looking at the Queen of Wands, we understand that in the evolution of the core cards, this is the completion that we can aspire to when we look within ourselves. And we're not ready yet to step to the king level, where we actually are ready to give back to the community. The Queen is certainly mastering their own skills, depending on the suit we're looking at. In this case, this is, as we said, the suit of Wands, so the suit of fire, and the archetype of the Queen of Wands is the performer. And necessarily, the King of Wands is the archetype of the entrepreneur. It's the person that always starts new projects and also has the maturity and the skills to complete them. We are now moving to the suit of cups. So the alchemical element of the suit of cups is the element of water, and water is always referred to feelings and emotions. The ace of cups, as we've seen earlier for the ace of wands, is always the beginning. In this case, red by itself as a keyword, it can also mean a new relationship, which is not necessarily just a romantic relationship, but it could be any kind of relationship that is affecting our heart. The Two of Cups is one of the cards that most points to a couple. This is literally the way in which we signify growth. We understand that we're not alone anymore. There is someone else, and we need to reckon that. Remember, we use the word reckoning also for the Two of Wands. That is because it's implicit in the meaning or the numerological meaning of the number 2. So we are reckoning the presence of someone else in our lives. The Three of Cups, with the number 3 numerologically tied to the sense of growth, we understand that there's more than one person in our entourage. We understand that it's important to relate to everyone else. No man is an island, but also a couple is not necessarily enough to be able to fulfill your lives. You need to understand that you need to cooperate with others in your life. And in this case, it's always representing a sort of celebration. When it comes to the Four of Cups, we always refer to the numerological meaning on number 4, which is pointing to something very stable, very still. If you think about the square, so number 4 as represented by a square, it is one of the most stable figures in geometry. There is a sense of consolidation when it comes to the 4 in all of the suits. We need to understand how to read the Four of Cups by relating to the fact that this is the suit of emotions and feelings. So when you try and put all of your feelings into a box, it is the moment in which you feel a sense of restlessness. You feel that there is nothing necessarily on display here in order to be able to satisfy you. And therefore, you kind of, you feel like you cannot go any further. You cannot move. You have something that is being offered to you, but you're not reaching out for the cup because you're kind of stuck. The Five of Cups, as I said, talking about the Five of Wands, the number 5 always points to disruption, and it's a necessary disruption because sometimes when the 4 becomes overwhelming, we go for a 4, we go from consolidation into stagnation, and the only way to get out of stagnation is with the number 5 to create disruption. In the suit of the heart, the suit of feelings, this disruption translates into a loss. When we're looking at number 6, we're always looking at a transaction. In this case, it's a transaction of the memory. We find refuge after the sense of loss of the Five of Cups. We find refuge in a memory from the past that gives us nostalgia, but at the same time, a sense of safety. When it comes to the Seven of Cups, we understand that we cannot live in the past forever. And so we are actually presented with a number of choices in front of us. But be aware that not all of the choice represents something good for us. As you can see here, there is a snake in one of these cups. And so that the Seven of Cups always points to a moment in which we really need to focus on what we're doing in order to be able to choose the right thing for us. The Eight of Cups in some decks, not necessarily in this one, but the cups of the Eight of Cups in other decks will be overturned. They will be just laying on the ground, spilling the liquid that they contained. In this one, we can see them upright, but I believe that the meaning is best conveyed as understanding that we are leaving something behind. We are leaving something that no longer serves us. It's something that we believe may be broken, and whether it is broken or not, because in this case the cups are not broken, they're still upright, they do not represent something necessary for us, and what becomes necessary for us is actually to take a step away from this situation. When we're looking at the Nine of Cups, there is this sense of a wish come true. It's also representing abundance. One thing that I want to point out for the Nine of Cups as well is that this sense of abundance is also something that is not necessarily 100%. It feels like there is something coming our way that makes us happy, but this happiness, because it's not yet shared with anyone else, as you can see here, the person is by themselves, it doesn't feel like it's complete yet. The sense of completion will come when we will share this abundance with everyone else, and therefore that's why in this case we see the family rejoicing in happiness, dancing, etc., and the rainbow in the sky with the 10 cups. It is the sense of abundance that can only be felt as complete and when we actually give back to the community. And now looking at the court cards in the suit of cups, we understand the evolution of the court cards in the suit of feelings. So when it comes to the page of cups, we think of the archetype of the empath. This person feels everyone else's feelings, and sometimes they can be easily overcome simply because they have not matured yet. We're not talking about a Queen of Pentacles. So there is a strong sense of needing to protect themselves. The Knight of Cups is always referred to as the Casanova. I personally, sometimes I chuckle when I say that. It's a whimsical way to see the Knight of Cups. I do understand where that is coming from, however, and I think that it's a really good way to think of this archetype. On the other hand, I also understand there is this sense of transaction. So perhaps this person, because remember, we have this sense of evolution throughout the court card. So we start with the pages. The pages are always the apprentices. And then the knights feel that they have learned enough in order to be able to go out there and explore. So if we see that and we refer it back to the suit of feelings, we can see how we can actually think of the Knight of Cups as a Casanova. However, we also know that they don't yet have that necessary maturity to actually be at home with their own feelings. We will reach that with the Queen of Cups, which is also referring to the archetype of the mystic. For example, the Queen of Cups is always the person that is at peace with their own feelings. They have understood completely everything that is happening within themselves, and they are at peace. When they reach the stage in which they can actually help others, they reach to completion with the figure of the king. The King of Cups is obviously the authority when it comes to mastering their own feelings, but also helping others. This somehow is also called the archetype of the Hades, so the king of the underworld. And the reason behind that is because there is a sense of compassion and kindness that needs to be present in a king of the underworld. We're moving on to the suit of swords. So the suit of swords refers to the alchemical element of air, and as such it points to thought, the mind. The ace of swords, as we were saying, is always pointing to new beginnings, but because it is referring to the suit of the mind, we think about new thoughts, new projects, something that really comes to us first and foremost throughout our mind, and so on an intellectual level. When it comes to the Two of Swords, as you can see here, this person is blindfolded. Sometimes in other decks, the person is not blindfolded. They might simply be closing their eyes. Sometimes they're keeping their eyes open. What matters to say is that this person is stuck between a kind of hard place, which are represented by these two swords. They cannot take a decision. They don't necessarily know where to go. There is this sense of being stuck, not knowing what to do. And unfortunately, the time is ticking. When we look at the Three of Swords, most of the time, 99% of tarot readers, they will tell you that the keyword associated with the Three of Swords is the keyword for heartbreak. And it's very easy because visually, it's very easy to understand that, there's clouds, it's raining, and there's a heart which has been pierced by three swords. I understand that this is a very excellent visual aid to remember the meaning of this card, but let's not forget that we're talking about the suit of swords, and the alchemical element associated is air, and air is associated with the mind, thoughts, worries sometimes. So the way in which I personally read the Three of Swords is always the numerological meaning of the growth in the suit of the mind. Sometimes our thoughts take control over us. We lose control over everything that is happening to us. We don't know what to think. After the Three of Swords, we're looking at the Four of Swords, which is pointing to a necessary moment of stillness. This is the moment in which our thoughts have been so overwhelming for us that our body itself, but especially our mind, is commanding us to just take a step back, power down, reboot, and just take a moment, because we cannot simply go on like that. Now, the Five of Swords is, together with the Seven of Swords, is probably one of the cards where you'll hear a lot of tarot readers with different thoughts about it. I refer back to the epistolar conversations, so letters exchanged between Pamela Coleman Smith and friends. She was referring to this card, and she was talking about the tale of the giant. There is a giant that lives in an island, and there's two groups of people. The giant normally feeds off people, so he eats people. And what happens is that when it's the giant by himself and the people are united, they can actually defeat the giant. So he thinks about a stratagem, and he divides the people confronting him in two groups. He goes to the leader of one of the two groups, telling them that the other group is plotting against them. And then he goes to the leader of the other group, telling them exactly the same. This way, he actually manages to put these two groups of people one against the other, so in such a way that he can then overcome both groups of people. This is, to me, if I have to pick one keyword for this card, is the gaslighting, because I strongly believe that this is exactly what Pamela Coleman Smith was talking about when describing this card. The Six of Swords, as we know now by the sixes, it's always implying transaction. And in this case, it's implying that transaction which is embarking upon a journey you don't necessarily want to go through, but you have to, because it will take you to a better place. And most of the time it's referring to the suit of the mind. So it's almost as if we were to reckon a thought we always wanted to ignore, but now we have to necessarily accept it. And as I was saying before, the Seven of Swords is, again, one of those cards that there's a lot of people with different opinions on how to read it. Personally, I really like to refer back to the Golden Dawn Hermetic title assigned to this card, which is the Lord of Unstable Effort. Aleister Crowley changed when he created his own tarot deck. And so I believe that's when people started having differing opinions rather than the hermetic title assigned by the Golden Dawn. I like the Golden Dawn's title because Lord of Unstable Effort points to the fact that someone is still doing something. There is an action that has been taken, but because it's an effort, so that puts that sheds a light on the difficult circumstances this person is going through, and it points to the fact that they possibly had to do something they were not necessarily happy to do. It may have been something against their own values, ethics, and moral values. It may be something that they consider is not necessarily um, something they will do on a normal basis, on a daily basis, but they had to do it. Perhaps they needed to save someone else. Perhaps they're stealing these swords because they need to bring into someone who cannot defend themselves. We will never know what's behind this card. If I had to pick a keyword, I would definitely think about imposter syndrome. And when you think about imposter syndrome is when you're asked or you're forced by the circumstances to stand up and do something that you're not really necessarily comfortable to do, and you think that you actually do not qualify to do that thing, but you are being forced by the circumstances, and so you just have to go with the flow. When it comes to the Eight of Swords, we're looking at the person that is in a cage. Most of the times, because we're looking at the suit of the mind, this cage is of their own making. And they don't always realize, but they're not necessarily stuck in there. If they just had the possibility to lower their blindfold, they would see that there is a way out of the cage. And the Nine of Swords is very powerful, as you can see from the symbology of the card, and it points to anxiety. For me, it's waking up at 3 a.m. and looking at the world or whatever is coming your way and seeing it through the eyes of despair. We literally despair about something. Under the light of the day, we will probably look back at what we were despairing about and see it in a different way. Perhaps not as catastrophic, but at 3 a.m., everything feels very bleak. And the Ten of Swords for me is always, I always combine it with the numerological meaning of the number 10. So we're definitely looking at the possibility to see the completion of a cycle. So we reach the completion of the suit of the mind with the number 10. In this case, this is necessarily pointing to an ending. And as you can see here, there's a bit of an overkill because a person, in order to defeat someone, you don't necessarily need to stab someone 10 times. Obviously, it needs to be 10 swords because there is the symbology in the card. But at the same time, it almost feels like it's rock bottom. You've hit rock bottom. It is the final loss and defeat. But guess what? You can only go upwards from there. And again, we're looking at court cards, so now we'll know that there is this sense of evolution. The pages are always apprentices in the suit that we're looking at, so this is the suit of swords. So this is the person who's always inquisitive in the suit of the mind. We can call it the archetype of the detective. The detective is the person that is always asking why. They always need to know why things happen. When it comes to the Knight of Swords, as we said before, the Knight of Swords is the apprentice that has learned enough to be self-sufficient, and they think that they can go out and do something about it, but they're not mature enough, they're not the queen or the king yet. And therefore, it still gives you this sense of really powerful sense of movement, but sometimes it's a movement that doesn't really have a direction yet. So the Knight of Swords is the archetype of the warrior or the crusader, because of course it's the archetype of the person that in the suit of the minds has a really strong idea and they want to fight for it, even though sometimes nobody else understands them. The Queen of Swords is always referring to that sense of maturity and mastering their own mind and their own thoughts, and as such, it can best be seen as the archetype of the judge. In this case, it's the person that sees black and white, but they also understand the various shades of gray. And when it comes to the King of Swords in this case, we also understand that it's referring to someone who has matured and mastered so well their own minds that they have become an expert. And as such, this is the archetype we're looking at here with the King of Swords, the expert or the scientist. And now we're looking at the suit of pentacles. Now the suit of pentacles is referring to the alchemical element of earth, which is always referring to material resources, and as such perhaps something related to financial resources or a career, but also natural resources like nature around us. So when we think about the aces, we should now know that aces always point to new beginnings. When we relate that to the suit of the earth or the resources, it could be a new project in our career or something that we want to do related to natural resources. The Two of Pentacles is a very whimsical card. This person is definitely panicking, but it's a kind of a funny panicking because they're juggling between two pentacles, so two good things. It's the same sense of looking at two different types of dessert. For example, if you like to eat dessert, if you like something sweet, and they're both really appealing to you, but you don't necessarily know which ones you want because you have to choose only one. The Three of Pentacles instead is always pointing out to a cooperation and teamwork. In this case, what we need to understand when we are part of a team is that no one can do the full job by themselves. We are necessarily part of a team because we are called to do whatever it is that we do best and also use whatever the others do best. When we're looking at the number 4, as we said before, 4 points to consolidation. When we're looking at the suit of the earth, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of dynamism in there. So consolidation with the suit of earth in the 4 of Pentacles can mean taking everything within our own hands, trying to keep everything for ourselves. So there is this sense of consolidation when it comes to the finances, for example, is almost the equivalent of putting your money, stuffing it under your mattress. There's no movement here. There's no investment here. It is literally just gathering all of your profits and keeping them still. You can see why the Five of Pentacles is something that is disrupted that sense of consolidation because it has become stagnation. And therefore, the Five of Pentacles points to being left out in the cold. This is facing our own poverty. And it's not necessarily a poverty that is financial in nature. It could be. But it's also a poverty that points to the poverty of natural resources. But it's also the poverty of not being part anymore of a community. We have been cast out in the cold, exiled. And we can see that because there is a light behind this window, but we're not part of the light. We're actually outside, and it's cold, and it's snowing, and we cannot go back anymore. And the Six of Pentacles, as always, is implying this sense of transaction. What I like to point out in this card is that there is, yes, the keyword could be seen as charity, but at the same time, we need to understand that transaction is bi-directional. So there is this sense of giving to others because they need it, but also there is the sense of accomplishing something. That is something we receive back. When it comes to the Seven of Pentacles, there is some sort of reassessment. We're just stopping because at this point in our life, we're not necessarily sure that we're going down the right path. We have done a lot. So what we need to do right now is to just take a break, look what we've done, understand whether this is something we want to keep on doing, and deciding. And obviously, once we understand whether the direction was the right one or we change direction, but we need to keep going. The Eight of Pentacles is always pointing to doubling down on your hard work. The Nine of Pentacles is always pointed to abundance, but in this case, because we're looking at abundance in the suit of the earth, so resources that could be either financial resources or natural resources, we're looking at the abundance of a windfall, for example, coming our way. But let's not forget that like the Nine of Cups, where there is this abundance of a wish come true, we feel like this is not 100% of our desire. It's not the way in which we need to celebrate, because we will get to that only when we learn how to celebrate by giving back to the community, which is something that we finally do in the Ten of Pentacles. And now looking at the core cards in the Suit of Pentacles, as we know, there is this sense of evolution, so the pages are the apprentices. In this case, we're referring back to an apprentice that has a really strong sense of nature and the nature around them. And so this is the naturalist. It's the person that absolutely loves animals, loves nature, and is always trying to understand how nature works, so it can also be a student. When we're looking at the Knight of Pentacles, of course, we have this sense of knowing that Knight is not an apprentice anymore. They know something about life, but they don't know everything about life. And there is always this sense of movement. And a best archetype to describe the Knight of Pentacles will be the soldier. The soldier is the person that always obeys the orders. It's not like the warrior. If you remember, we talked about the warrior with the Knight of Swords. The warrior is the independent kind of crusader that has an ideal and they want to defend this ideal. They don't need anyone to point them to the ideal. They don't need anyone to give them an order. The Knight of Pentacles does need an order. They need a direction. They need a leader. And then we got the Queen of Pentacles, which is the archetype of the nurturer. So the Queen of Pentacles is mastering their skills with all of their resources around them. They are in direct touch with nature. They understand nature. They feel like they are part of nature. And as such, they can use nature. They can yield the power of nature in order to nurture others. They are also the healers. If you think about, for example, a doctor could be a Queen of Pentacles. It's someone that really wants to heal others. And last but not least, we've got the King of Pentacles. So in this case, there is this really strong sense of mastering their skills and understanding how the world works and understanding how nature works and relating back to their power in the community. For the kings, we always have to remember the king by excellence, which is basically the emperor. So the King of Pentacles is the manager, is the boss, is the person that knows how to give orders to others because they know, they can see, they have a really long-term vision and they know how to make it work. So as I said, this was a really, let's say, basic introduction on how, as an absolute beginner, to look at the tarot cards, perhaps spot a few symbols to visualize the meaning of the cards and remember them, memorize them. If you're interested in something more advanced, with my Starlight and Sunlight members, I'm actually doing a course which is on a pro reading level. And we're looking at all of the influences when it comes to astrological influences, alchemical influences, clusters and constellations related to the major arcanas, how to read reversals, for example, how to pretty much do anything on a pro level. And it's something quite interesting. So if you want to join my membership, you're more than welcome. We have a lot of really fun things doing together every week. And but that will be for a more advanced level of reading. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.